This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is New York radio-based promotion powerhouse Skateboard Marketing Ltd, headed by music industry veteran Munsey Ricci. Next year, he will be celebrating his 35th anniversary of taking heavy metal and hard rock music to the airwaves. Founded in 1991 by the former PolyGram Records executive, Skateboard Marketing Ltd quickly established itself as the leader in radio and artist development with a focus on all formats of aggressive music for 3 decades. Love of music, long-standing relationships, and profound respect from colleagues and artists have earned the company a reputation as the go-to company for all national radio promotion in North America. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thanks for having us on. It's going to be great, Catherine.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's such a pleasure, honestly. I mean, recently I saw you. We were doing an event in Brooklyn, and I walked in and I was like, oh, my God. I felt like it was a reunion. I hadn't seen you in years. So we should start off talking about that, because that is kind of a battle of the bands that's currently going on here in the New York City area, but it is also happening overseas. So we should start out talking about how you were one of the judges. Rob Caggiano and quite a few other guys were there to be judges. So we should start out with that.
Yeah, well, you know, the Wacken Festival is probably the second largest festival in Europe, next to Rock in Rio, which used to happen in Brazil. And Rock in Rio, there was close to 250,000 people there. They had like an amusement park and had campgrounds, and it was very, very cool. Wacken is the largest festival in Germany, in northern Germany. And usually they sell out. The day tickets go on sale, they sell out 80,000 tickets, like within like 4 hours. It's ridiculous. Now they do have like multiple stages. So there's the 3 main stages. There's like a hardcore stage. There's a wet stage. They have a Viking village. It's very, very cool for anybody that's into the European festival scene. And they do, for the opening acts for, you know, the developing artist stages, they do a battle in every state. And well, most states they do it. And then they have a national final, and that band gets to open the developing artist stage at Wacken, which I guess if I was a developing band, you know, we didn't have a record or anything, that'd be like the best thing you could really get, dude, you know? So Crimson Shadows won in 2013. And I was at Wacken in Germany then, and I actually saw their set. I saw them live. They were great. So every year they do it here. And, you know, actually the finals are on April 12th, which is coming up. That's like the end of this week. And we're going to have the New York State finalist. And then they have the national finals, which comes in for that. And we don't know who's going to win yet. But,
Yes. It's very exciting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's great. You know, the Wacken Festival has not only like with all their stages, but it's also kind of like that little villages set up. You know, and in the Viking village, it's kind of funny. It kind of looks like a scene out of a Mad Max film, you know, like dudes just driving around on quads dressed up like they're in a Mad Max movie, you know, wearing Viking stuff, or, you know, dressed up like they're an extra for a Mad Max film, you know, and their quads are all set up with like horns and like all kinds of cool stuff on it. It's pretty dope.
Wow, that sounds like a Woodstock at a different level. Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Wow, very exciting. So, yes, I'm going to go to that on Saturday. I think it's happening at No
Where is it?
Call, No Show,
Yeah,
and
No Call.
Non-Residents. Those were the 2 that won the night that I saw in Brooklyn. So I'll be there rooting them on. So that's very cool. You have a lot of things coming up, though. The other night when we were at the Michael Monroe show, we were chatting for a little bit, and you said that you were going to be going over to Norway, and you're going to be on another panel. So what is that happening, and what is that all about?
The Inferno Festival is, I mean, it's a lot of black and death metal. And to anybody that's been to Norway knows Beyond the Gates and Inferno Festival are the two main festivals that happen in Europe. Well, at least in Norway. And we went to Beyond the Gates in 2022, and that was amazing. The Inferno Festival people invited us over, and they're doing a panel. They have workshops and panels, and they bring in industry people to just talk about what we do and how we do it and what's the best way to go about it. So it doesn't matter whether you're signed to Century Media, Roadrunner, Nuclear Blast, regardless, the inside marketing people do that. But for an independent artist, a lot of them don't have that. They don't have that luxury. They have to go out and hire somebody to do it. And some bands just don't even have the budget to hire anybody. They're all pooling their money together to pay the rent on the studio. So they do a lot of workshops. So Jeremy Safer, who's like one of the predominant photographers up in Boston, is speaking on a panel, and then along with us, it's me, Mike Gitter from Century Media Records, Mike Faley from Metal Blade Records, and then Michael from Season of Mist, and Jim Sexton, who's actually directing the Roadrunner documentary on Roadrunner Records. So it's more or less the OG panel of people that have been doing this gig since the 1980s. So I mean, we all got some stories to tell. We all got a lot of stories to tell, and I don't know if we can do it all in 45 minutes, but we're gonna try. But Inferno happens on Easter weekend, so it's great that I'm gonna be away for the holidays, but on the downside, I have to leave a day early so I can be here with my family for Easter. So I'm going to get 3 days in Norway, and we do this panel, and then we're going to see a lot of good shows.
Wow, I'm jealous. I know. I've never been to Norway, and then to add the great music to it, that would be really cool. Wow, very good. So I wanted to touch on something that you had said before, though. When you referenced this panel, you're the OGs. When you go back to listening to music now and you go back to listening to music when maybe skateboarding started, early 90s, or going back further than that when you were at PolyGram, music has really changed. So even though you've been kind of very tried and true with heavy metal, which I, of course, have always been heavy metal myself. Heavy metal in itself has kind of changed along the way as well. So it'd be interesting to get your perspective on how you saw heavy metal artists when you were at PolyGram, and then as you've moved into marketing the bands, meeting guys before they're signed, when they're signed, kind of moving along in that path. I'm sure you could probably reference, bands that people have tried to mimic and have not been able to do it, or bands that have tried to mimic and maybe surpassed really famous bands themselves. So it would be kind of interesting to get your perspective.
Listen, music's going to change and it evolves. When I started, for me, it was Black Sabbath. I was 12, 13, and I saw the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album with like a guy lying on a bed with three naked chicks with horns over him with 3 6s on the bedpost. I'm like, what is this? I got to listen to this. And I heard the opening riff of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and I was blown away. And then after that, I went through the album. Then I started listening to other Sabbath albums. Then I found Judas Priest. I found Iron Maiden. I found Diamond Head. I found Motorhead. I found a lot of really cool bands. And I mean, my heart's really in thrash. I mean, I grew up with thrash. And if you listen to like the evolution of thrash, the one thing you look at is let's pick like one band. Let's take like a Metal Church or Exodus or Slayer or Testament or even like Death Angel. The Bay Area thrash scene just produced some of the greatest bands. And then we saw great bands come out of LA. But you remember that hard rock back then they called metal also. So, Winger was not a metal band. They were a hard rock band. A lot of people called them a hair band, but they weren't really a hair band. They were just a hard rock band. The same goes for LA Guns. That was just the decor of the time. That's just what bands were wearing. And as it went on, yeah, Chuck Schindler in Death. I mean, he came along and wrote the book on death metal, and along came the Tampa Bay death scene. And we started seeing really cool bands come out of Florida, like Morbid Angel and Obituary, and the death metal scene kind of blew up, and then that evolved into deathcore. And if you look at bands today, you look at a band like Signs of the Swarm or Lorna Shore. I mean, they're total deathcore bands, but their style is very different from traditional death metal from what it was back in the day. And the same goes for thrash. A lot of the newer thrash bands, like even Warbringer, yeah, it kind of has that vibe that you're listening to old school like Testament or Exodus, but it's new school. Even the new school power metal. You listen to new school power metal like Unleash the Archers, great band out of like Vancouver. And then you listen to like some of the early power metal, you listen to bands like Camelot or Blind Guardian. I mean, it all evolves into something where, all right, now you had the old school. Now you have the new school coming up that doesn't want to be like the old school. They want to be something different, but they were heavily influenced by it. So when you get that, what you get is you get a band that actually has the ability to create and write and take something to the next level and make something very, very cool. And at the end of the day, you can go in and sell as many tickets as you want, but a band has to make something sound good. There has to be substance to it. They have to actually write something that sounds good, record it and make it sound good, and then replicate that live. And that costs a lot of money. And a lot of bands that can actually do that don't really have the money to do it. And I mean, if you look at Anthrax early in the day, I mean, it was impossible to replicate what Fistful of Metal had. And that was with Neil Turbin, the original singer. When they were 19 years old, they couldn't replicate what they did on the album live. It took them like a little bit. And then finally, at that point, they got it. And they became a mainstay at the format. And, people go back. And I don't even want to think of how many millions of people bought instruments after listening to an Anthrax record. How many people bought a microphone from listening to Joey Belladonna or Neil Turbin, or a guitar from listening to Scott Ian, or drum kits from listening to Charlie Benanti? I mean, that's the whole thing where music influences a next generation, and the next generation does what they want, and they bring it to the next level and create something more cool. And in some cases, it sounds even better than it did back in the day. It's bizarre, but that's how it is.
I would have to agree with you because as you roll through a lot of the names of those bands, I was having flashbacks of my early days, hanging out at places here in Westchester. I practically lived at streets. I saw a lot of bands come through that, they were carrying guys out. I mean, the mosh pit became like an emergency room. I mean, there was a lot of people getting hurt there on a Friday night. It was pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah.
But, back then, you're right. The live music was what really got a lot of these people, motivated, and it's kind of interesting because those venues, and I have to say, even recently, I mean, I'm going back a couple of months ago, but I saw Marky Ramone, and all of a sudden, we're like in the middle of a mosh pit. Like, it's just how music affects people, and I think it gets them motivated and it brings them back. And that's what it's all about. I think you're right with that. But, when music sounds different now, do you think that it's the equipment? You think that our equipment has advanced? Because back in the day, a lot of this stuff was being recorded with SSL, and, things have really kind of taken, large leaps since then.
Well, I started my career as a guitar player in a band. I was in a thrash band, and I worked in a recording studio. I was actually a graduate of Center for the Media Arts for audio engineering back in the early 80s. I had a half scholarship, and I worked in a jingle house with my friend Butch. He actually goes by the name Easy Reed, and he won a Grammy for a world thing he did, and he was nominated for another Grammy. So, and he's an engineer as well. So, that's where I started. And if you remember back in the day, people were recording on an old Neve console with like a high back Studer on 2-inch tape. And nothing can replicate the warmness that you're going to get from analog sound. So to any of the old school fans that were into like, the old arena bands back in the day, like the Stones or Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin, those records are very warm. Digital has gotten a lot better. It can't replicate that whole warmness that you get from analog, but on the same token, it's pretty close. But the gear has progressed. And by gear progressing, the artist can progress. But if you notice something, any gearhead that you talk to is like, oh, that's an old tube Marshall. How much you want for that? Yeah, I want to use that to record. Why? Because they're warm. It's not like solid state. Solid state has a little bit of tinniness to it, but you could still replicate with plugins, but they'd rather just do it like right out of the chute and just mic it in the studio, which is good. But I think today most artists have a better advantage because not only is the gear better, but they can buy Pro Tools, they can go somewhere and record drums, then they can do bass, guitar, or keyboard tracks in their living room, and then they can do vocal tracks in their living room, and then they have to go somewhere to mix, okay? And then they have to go somewhere to master. So in those days of having to spend 50 to 100 grand to make a record, they're over. A lot of guys are buying property like upstate or in Nashville somewhere, and they set up a house on their property with their studio. And that's the only way to stay in business. Whereas because most artists are doing it themselves, or unless they just don't know how to. So I think the proper thing to look at is, well, with the new gear they have, there's a lot more opportunity and a lot more cool stuff you can do compared to the old gear. But honestly, myself, I still think that analog sounds best. That warmness you get from a Neve and a Studer highback, I've never seen anybody really be able to replicate that the right way.
Well, I think you make a good point because everyone always, says they sounded really good, the vocals sound really good. And, there's kind of like an industry thing that you could make probably anyone sound good nowadays, right? You can kind of,
Yeah, you can.
tweak those things where back in the day, they didn't have that ability to make anyone sound super great, right? So the advances nowadays may make an artist even better than their true sound. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember too that, not all bands can play, as crazy as it sounds. If you listen to a band back in the day, it was guitar and amp. Okay. When I was 10 years old, if you didn't know how to play, you knew somebody didn't know how to play. Nowadays, you get somebody, they can go buy plugins and a console, or they can buy outboard gear and they can make themselves sound good. Okay. So they have the ultimate advantage. But at the end of the day, either you know how to play or you don't know how to play. And I mean, that's why I give like major kudos to School of Rock, because when I was coming up, we didn't have School of Rock. If you didn't know how to play, you had to learn, or you took lessons, or you learned from somebody who did. Now they go to School of Rock, and 2, 3 years later, they're doing showcases. And you're like, hey, 3 years ago, that cat couldn't play. And now you're watching him and he's getting on stage and he's hammering out like The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. Or they're doing South of Heaven by Slayer. They're kicking out like some old school jams and they actually can play. So I think the opportunity's there. But, most artists, every musician just has to learn the craft of their trade. Now, at least with skateboard marketing, when a record company comes to us to market a record, I have to sit here and go through each track, figure out what would be the best single, stop and put together a timeline, and figure out, okay, the first single is going to go live on this date, and the video will go live a week later so we can have a press release, 2 press releases, one when the single goes live, and then drop the video a week later. Sometimes we have the video and the single together. Then sometimes we'll have 4 or 5 singles before an album. Then the album comes, and our real job starts when the album drops, because metal radio as a whole encompasses not only college and public radio, but commercial and syndicated radio too. So what happens here is the charts are album driven, they're not singles driven. So you look at the media based charts, it's all singles. You look at the North American College chart or the Metal Contraband Metal Radio chart, they're album charts. So our job really starts from week of street going for ads at radio and then working it up the charts for 8 weeks. Now, in the case of like a lot of small independent artists, sometimes it's going to take 2 or 3 records. It's never going to happen overnight, and then you have to have your distributor on the digital side has to be able to at least make sure that all the digital DSPs have access and your stuff is listed because it's all streaming now. I mean, back in the day, it's like we got out of school on Tuesday, and the first thing we did was go to the record store to buy all the new stuff, you know. And nowadays, everybody streams, whether it's Spotify or Apple or Yahoo or AOL Music or any of the other platforms. That's where it is. So, like physical product, especially vinyl, is big at the merch table. That's why I always tell everybody who's a fan, support the band that they're into. Every band that you're into, go to the show and buy merch because that's how they live and that's how they eat. I mean, yeah, we get paid by their label, but there's a word called recoupable. And in every artist contract, every dollar that the label spends, the band has to recoup. So, support the band so that they can actually make money and eat. That's the main point. The band you like today, support them, and then maybe they make another record, and you'll have a band that's around for a while, and you can go see them.
I really find it interesting the way the band is brought to you, and you have to kind of do your research. It's kind of like doing an investigation where you're actually looking first of all at sometimes bands will have a theme to them. They'll have like you could just identify this is what they're always bringing up in their lyrics, or this is what their sound is like. And sometimes bands, at least as a listener, as a fan, I find that sometimes you can automatically recognize the sound of a band because every song sounds similar. So I find your job is probably pretty tough if a band has kind of a similar sound to them, pulling out what you think is, going to be the hit or should be the first single released. So what is your science? What is the method to your madness?
There is no science. There is no science to this job. There is no school you can go to learn this gig. The only way for you to really learn is to go to work for a record company and work in the promotion department. You want to learn publicity? You go to work at a label and work in publicity. The same applies for retail and digital and marketing. You get a job and you go and you learn to work. Now, I was a marketing major in college. So, yeah, you learn your basic fundamental, 101 of how marketing works, but there's no science to how it works. It's all relationship driven and it's creativity. You have to look at something, figure out what would be the best approach, and then create that. Now, you can replicate hypothetically what other labels and bands have done, but ironically, the fans know that. They're like, oh, they did, Korn did that on Follow the Leader. Or they'll go back and say, oh, you know what? The old industrial band Drown did that like 20 years ago. Somebody's rehashing something. So, I mean, everything's been done already. It's just how much can you create and what angle do you want to play to take that out and make it work? So anybody who thinks it's a 9 to 5 gig, well, then they're a suit. They should go to work on Wall Street, or go work as an auto mechanic or something because it's not the gig for them. It's a 70-hour-a-week gig and it's all relationship driven. It's all the people and the people that you don't know, well, you get to know them. And where do you meet them? You go to conventions, you go to festivals, you go to shows. They're going to be there. You go there and you meet them and you get to know everybody. And it makes your job a lot easier. A lot of people don't want to put in that legwork. And if you don't put in the legwork, well, the return isn't going to be there. If you're successful at what you do, well, That's good. You still work 70 hours a week, but you get to enjoy the view. You don't want to put in the 70 hours a week. You don't get to enjoy the view. You get to work a miserable job and go to a show and get loaded and say, okay, I had 7 beers. My girl's driving home. Okay, yeah, it was a good time. you know?
Yeah, I get it. You know, it's interesting when you talk about this forming relationships, bringing in a new band, and you have to do all your research and everything. I find it interesting because if you pick a single, have you had bands give you a little pushback saying that's not the one we thought you were going to pick, or we really wanted
Oh,
this one?
absolutely. Absolutely. All the time. They're like, you really think that? I'm like, yeah, I do. Why? Because if you look at all the metal shows, I mean, we have 350 or so stations across the country that we deal with. And, some play black and death metal, some play stoner, some play hardcore, some play thrash, some are hard rock shows. They're going to play Def Leppard and the Scorpions. And then they'll play something new. Maybe they'll pop in like a Becoming Wolves or, a Sick and Beautiful. Like you look at a band like New Year's Day. I mean, yeah, they're an active rock band, but they're crunchy enough where some of this stuff works. So a lot of the mainstream shows will play bands like The Haunt and, New Year's Day, Stitched Up Heart, so all those bands will work at both formats, but not every song works. So I always go for the heaviest song that's the fastest, loudest, and has growl to it, because that's usually what works the best. And even if I don't like the song, I kind of know it. Hey, you know what? I know we're going to get traction on it. I know this can work. But on the same token, there's a band that I just didn't think was going to work and didn't think it was going to happen. And the band blew up. I fell in love with the band. And like Kilgore Smudge was one of them. I fell in love with the band. I thought they were amazing, but I didn't like the first single. I thought there was a different track that was better. But, listen, I was wrong. The band blew up, and like a year later, they were out on Ozfest on the second stage. So there is a little bit of luck and 90% talent, and like just an ear to know what you think can and can't work with your stations. The only way to know that is to know your stations. So if you don't know what they listen to and what they dig, and you're not familiar with any of the bands, well, maybe they shouldn't be doing this gig to begin with.
Wow, listening to you, that's a tremendous amount of work that you do. I mean, just to keep up with what stations are out there, what they're playing. Stations close, you and I were talking about my radio show experience, how radio shows kind of close overnight, they get bought out, all these things happen. It's like to stay current, I can't even imagine, to find out what's going on across the country. I mean, that itself is a job.
Well, you know what? This isn't really a job. This is a lifestyle. This is a lifestyle gig. So either you're into it or you're not into it. It has to be into the music. You have to be into each individual band. You have to be into like venues and live shows in the scene. You have to be into the decor and everything. That's got to be your thing. And that's been my thing since day one, since I was a kid. And I'm not going to change because that's just me. If you really look at everybody successful in the industry, it's a lifestyle. That's what it is. And by having a lifestyle, I listen to it all day, every day because it's my lifestyle and that's what I like. People that are just doing it because it's something to do, well, they probably don't belong in the gig anyway.
Yeah, that I understand. So I wanted to go back to something you said earlier because videos and visuals are different now. Everything, like you said, is streaming. We grew up with MTV and coming home after school or coming home after work. Everyone was really tuned into all of the MTV characters and what was going on with all of that. Is it harder for them to drop videos now because there's so much on YouTube, but YouTube really isn't the new, MTV, or is it? So how would you talk about, them making a video and pushing that? Because, for me, it's all social media. So the band's got to be on Instagram. The band's got to be on TikTok. The band's got to be on Facebook. They got to be really promoting themselves, not just having a promoter, but promoting themselves. Would you agree?
Yes and no. There is a metal show on MTV. It's called Metal Thrash and Madness. At least out by us, it's channel 53 on Saturdays, and it's an hour of like all new stuff, all new bands. Now we took a band out, the Phoenix Within. They're not really a metal band. They are metal, but they're a little more on the prog side. And we did get the video for next on Metal Thrash and Madness. Now there is MTV Classic, which plays all the old stuff. You'll hear, you'll hear Korn, you'll hear Motorhead, you'll hear Warbringer, you'll like see old stuff, but not a lot of new stuff. Metal Thrash and Madness plays all that. And for anybody who's not aware of, they can just search for MTV, whatever channel it is on their provider, and find it. But the most important thing is, there are outlets like Vivo. You also have outside of like YouTube, and socials. The whole point of having social media is to have your network as big as possible, because you figure less than 10% of people that like your page or follow your page actually look at what your posts are. And you notice, like, for every 1,000 followers, maybe you'll get like, 10 likes, 20 likes, maybe, or unless you're like a bigger artist, you look at Zach Wild, he'll post something and in 3 hours he has 5,000 likes, or you look at the pop divas, they'll have 30, 40,000 likes in a 24-hour period. But then, you look at, a sign of the times, a band like Lorna Shore, they'll post a video on YouTube, or even Electric Callboy, out of Germany. I mean, dude, they posted Elevator Operator on YouTube, and within 24 hours, they had 1.3 million hits, which is huge. And then you'll look at a traditional band like Saxon, they'll post a video and they'll have, 200,000, because their fan base is older and they're not sitting around looking on their phone and sitting in front of their computer and looking at YouTube. So there's the age gap that comes in, So as an artist, you have to account for that. And if you're an older artist and you want to bring older fans in, well, then you have to look at it from a marketing standpoint. You have to do ticket giveaways with radio, okay? And obviously you got to do time buys on television. That works real well too, because older fans, what do? They get home, they eat, and they watch the news. And what do they listen to in their car? They're probably listening to a CD in their car. They're not streaming anything on Apple Music. Your age gap is a big difference on that. But back in the day, when MTV Headbangers Ball added a video, sales doubled. And I'll attest to that for the Cinderella record that we worked at PolyGram. When we got the added MTV, SoundScan doubled. Like within like a month or 6 weeks, it was ridiculous. Now it's a very different scene now, because it's just the mechanics and inner workings of everything is very different. That's kind of how you have to stop and approach that. Otherwise, at the end of the day, you're going to say, oh, yeah, we shot a video. It's up on our Facebook page. Well, if you only have 109 followers, it's not really helping you either. If you have 190,000 followers, that's a different story. That's going to help you, because that will transcend to the fan base. And when that transcends to a fan base, that means streaming numbers go up. If they're into physical product, they're going to go to Amazon or wherever they get all their physical from, and they're going to buy it. And we still have a record store here too, like Looney Tunes, out, in Copeg, Long Island. They still do in-stores all the time. And not only do they do in-stores, but you can go in and they have like a rack with all the new currents. And a lot of people go in, and that's the only place for a lot of folks out here to buy any of the new stuff.
You make a really good point, because Record Day is twice a year. And they call it Vinyl Album Day twice a year. And this Saturday here in New York City is record album day, and my friends at Generation Records down in the village, they'll be having their thing. Every record store will be having their thing, So I think it's great that people are still buying vinyl. But you make a good point, though, because that would be a great location for someone to do an appearance even. So have you been involved in trying to generate people to do like in person as part of promotional?
No, that's usually done by the retail or the marketing department at the label. We're radio promo exclusively. And you remember some of the metal shows I deal with, it could be a 1 hour show. And how many songs can you get on in an hour? Eight, between underwriting and mic breaks, you can get about 8 songs in. You get a 2 hour show, you're looking at about 15. If it's a prog show and you have a 2 hour show, you're only getting in maybe 10 records because every song is 8 minutes. Leprous, Dream Theater, all those bands, every song is 8 or 9 minutes long. And if you see something that's 6 minutes, you're like, wow, Catatonia's got a 6 minute song. That's awesome. Dude. So you have to stop and take that into account for when you're throwing something at radio. Now you get an in-store retail, the retail department will set that up, and I'll go to local radio and say, hey, the band's doing an in-store. When you do your metal show over the weekend, can you just go live and like give us a mention? Throw it up on your website. And that's how you drive traffic into the store. And usually most of those revolve around the show. So if the band has a show, let's say they're playing Irving Plaza, and they're going to do something at Generation Records, yeah, then we would go to the local stations we have in New York and New Jersey, and that's what we would do to help promote that through radio. Retail would work through the record store. Press would send out a press release that the band's doing an in-store, and they would send that out early. Then you have all your your news feeds. You have Loudwire, you have Metal Injection, you have Blabbermouth. You have Metal Sucks, you have Ghost Cult, you have a lot of cool online outlets. And with them, you can go, publicity will go straight to their online outlets and at least get that listed so that they know the band is doing an in-store. Now, in a case of a full tour, we're saying, okay, we have 30 dates. And if they're doing 30 in-stores, well, that's a lot of work. You need to get on that and lock it in. Some markets, I don't have any stations, you know, closest station is an hour and a half away, and so it's like, yeah, we could do something, but maybe you'll get a handful of fans will road trip it. It can be a tough call. You have to stop and look at what you have in that market and what makes the most sense. And in most cases, you don't want to spend a lot of money on it either because you may not see a return. I mean, it is a business. It's all about making money. To the label, it's about selling records. To a radio station, it's about selling advertising. To a retail outlet, it's about selling vinyl, CDs, and merch. So you can drive as much traffic as you want. If they don't buy merch or they're not buying tickets to a show, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It really all depends.
Yes, I'm sure you've had to make a lot of tough calls in your career of either saying something's not working or something could work better. Do you have any stories about how you felt that your experience in the past help you make decisions for a tough call?
Oh, yeah, that's just your experience in business. Anybody who's in business for themselves learns that out of the chute. And I mean, it takes a while to learn. I mean, this gig took me a couple of years to learn the ABCs. And then when I started this company, I'm still learning new stuff today. And here it is 34 years later. And I'm like, wow, why didn't I think of that 30 years ago? So, you do get kicked in the teeth a couple of times. You're like, wow, why didn't I do that? But your experience in what you do is going to guide you to that. And you just have to trust your gut and say, I've done this a lot in the past, and this is what worked. This is what I'm going with. I never tried this in the past. You know what? Let's give it a shot. And if it didn't work, well, maybe it wasn't the right approach. Maybe it was a great idea, but it just wasn't the right approach. And let's try doing it again and doing something different. But then in some cases, it'll work for one band, but it won't work for the other. So that's where, you have to stop and like kind of think, where's it going to work and if it's going to work and how it's going to work.
Yes. Earlier you had mentioned a couple of bands that had surprised you. Do you have any great stories about bands that you had worked with? Because I know the fans out there love to hear stories about the bands. So you would have met the bands early on, and now the bands may have been, floating around now for the last 10, 20, 30 years. You probably see the bands at a different level now. So you would have met them in the beginning. Do you have any beginning stories and kind of full circle?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in one case, there was Nothing Face, and it was a band from down in Baltimore. And we got hired on their first EP, and then we worked Pacifier for them. And the guitar player in the band, Tom Maxwell, actually went on to play with Vinnie Paul and Hell Yeah. So he made 5 records with Hell Yeah. So Tom Maxwell has been around for a long time. The other guys are still doing stuff, and Bill isn't around anymore. But yeah, there was them. There was Kilgore Smudge, which totally came out of left field, and I fell in love with the band. And they're still here. It is 25 years later, and I still listen to A Search for Reason because it's probably that and Avowal are like my 2 favorite records by the band. They did put out a new record, but Avowal and A Search for Reason, as I said, are like my favorites, and they're still here. Then you look at bands like Shadows Fall. One of the cats in Shadows Fall now plays with Anthrax. And Shadows Fall was, a metal band from Massachusetts. And they got out and they did their thing, and they're very cool live. And I see the guys all the time. Whenever they're in town, I'll go and see them. Or if I'm in Boston and they're playing, I'll go and see them. So, and the same thing goes for Zach at Black Label. We worked the very first Black Label record, and we were with the band all the way up to the Mafia record. And now they just take everything to active rock. They don't really do the metal thing anymore. And it's like, I love Zach. It's one of those things where we started working with him back in the day, and he became family. We don't work with him anymore, but it doesn't matter. He's still family.
That's cool. Any of these artists that started out really heavy and really switched over, a couple of artists have actually gone over and gone country. So have you had any experiences with anyone literally like leaving the heavy metal scene or the thrash scene and going into another genre?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, the ideal example of that, there was an industrial band back in the 90s called Godhead. And Jason, who was Godhead, I mean, if you kind of took like early Ministry or maybe N17 and you kind of mixed it together, that's kind of sort of what you got, or maybe some a little bit of Rorschach test thrown in there. So anybody who's an industrial fan will know those bands. Um, I mean, he did industrial for years, and every time we hung out, he had his face painted white, and he had his goth clothes on, and it was mad cool. And we'd have a good time when we were out and about. Well, he's a country artist now, and it's ironic because I look at photos, and he's got a beard and long hair, and he wears a cowboy hat, and it's like he's still the same guy, and he's still mad cool, but he left industrial to go play country. That seems to be happening a lot nowadays. A lot of people are going to country because the money's a lot better. The scene is like a lot more chill. And yeah, I guess people kind of dig country. I guess. I mean, it's not really my thing. I'll go to a show, I'll hang out, have a good time. I have a good time anywhere I go, but I'd rather go see a thrash band and get my blood to boil a little bit.
That's so funny. Yeah. No, I totally agree. You had mentioned Ministry earlier, and they did phenomenal. Last year, they were one of the opening bands with Alice Cooper and with Rob Zombie. The crowd went wild for them. And I was just like, wow, they've been around a long time. So it's really great to see some of these bands still opening up, for other big bands. It's pretty great to see that because I
Well,
think it's tough. It's tough to hang in there. and to keep getting called in on big acts or big tours. It's a huge compliment.
You have to remember too, if you listen to Al Jorgensen, especially when he was back in with Trent Reznor, okay, that wasn't industrial. That was more synth pop, like Land of Rape and Honey and like all those early records that were on Wax Trax Records out of Chicago. All that stuff was kind of more synth pop. And when I was in Chicago in what was it? My first time there was '87, and I went to Wax Trax, and there was a record store downstairs, and the record company was upstairs. And at the time, I worked for CMJ. I used to collate the magazine on weekends while I was in college, and I did some editorial. So I went in and I kind of just went in. I had lunch with everybody. It was cool. So really, like, The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste, Psalm 69, those records is when Al really got heavy. And we worked with him on the Thunderstruck record and the Relapse. We did the Live at Vakken, From Beer to Eternity, America Can't. Like, we did all those Ministry records via either Nuclear Blast or UDR or AFM Records. They all hired us on all of them. Ironically, I don't really know Al. I mean, I've only met him a few times. But the few times I met him, he was a really nice guy. He was cool, but, remember, like, with Al is pretty much a mainstay. He's kind of like one of the godfathers of that format. Anybody who was doing industrial back in the mid to late '80s, those are the guys that wrote the book on what that scene is all about. And there was another label called Slip Disc Records out of Chicago. They had N17. What else did they have? Rorschach Test. God, there was something else. Acumen Nation. There was a few. They had a few bands that their big thing was all industrial. They're not around anymore, but they had great bands, and the cats that were in those bands, some like Rorschach Test is still around, and the guys from N17, they all still work in the industry. They're all still making records with different projects. So that's one of those things where, as a viable format, those cats are lifers. That's what they do, and that's all they're going to do. And they're going to continue to do it until they can't do it anymore. And that's really what this gig is about. That's what I meant earlier when I said it's a lifestyle. It has to be what you want to do and how you want to live.
Yes, I know. Well, you're going into your 35th year next year. So you're not retiring. I get it. And you're going to keep doing this. So what are some of the things that you would like to see happen? Do you have things on your wish list that you're like, okay, I'd like to see this. I'd like to see that. Like, do you have any aspirations for the future?
Yeah. I mean, one thing, like, vinyl made a big comeback. And the beauty of vinyl is, when I was in high school, an album cost like $5, $6. Now you buy vinyl at the merch table and it's $40, $50. And vinyl sales are huge. And then you'll find that a lot of bands and the marketing department will put a download card in the vinyl. So when you buy the vinyl, you get a free digital download with it too. I mean, I would like to see, CD sales go back up again. But, obviously it's a sign of the times. That's probably not going to happen. It's really going to be all vinyl and digital. And if somebody's going to buy discs, well, they're going to be fans that are they have to have everything in each format. And they'll probably buy the European version because there's a different bonus track. They'll buy the Japanese version because there's a different bonus track, as well as South America and Australia, because different territories have a different bonus track. So the diehard fans are always going to do that. But, they're far and few compared to the mainstream mass. So I would like to see that come back, but it's wishful thinking, but no. And I kind of foresee that some bands that are just have these huge streaming numbers and huge merch sale numbers, I would like to see them start to do arenas or like large civic centers, 5,000 and 10,000 seat civic centers. And that's very doable in the near future for a lot of bands.
Well, that's cool. I'm sure you'll be able to help cultivate that from happening.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you on. I would like you to plug your social media, tell everyone exactly where they can find you, plug any upcoming events or anything that you have coming up.
Well, if they want to find us, they can go to skateboardmarketing.com, and on the very top of the index page on our homepage, it links to all our socials. So there's Facebook, X, Instagram. We also have a Vero page, which is kind of like one of the small social platforms. Not a lot of traffic, but I post on there anyway. We have a Tumblr page, so they can go in and they can like and follow. And on our social platforms, everything is just pretty much a company news feed. So they want to contact us. There's a contact page. They can email me. Those emails come straight to my phone, and I'm usually logged in all day with that. So I mean, even if it's a newer band looking for radio promotion, feel free to email and call. I mean, we're here. We're always here. We're not going anywhere. But just, if you go to our socials, just like and follow our pages.
Very good. Well, it is a pleasure to have you on. Thank you again, Munsey. And I will be seeing you at the upcoming events.
Yep, you'll see me on Saturday. We'll have a drink.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you again, and good luck with all of your planned travels. Thank you again, Munsey.
You got it.
You have been listening to Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium, Dream Central Station, LLC. My audio editor is Al Hemberger at the Loft Recording Studios in Bronxville, New York. This is WNEW 102.7 FM radio.